No, not recorded. If you could just send the links over, that would be fine.
Oh, I'll just record it now anyway, just for you.
All right, thank you, Carl.
Yeah, that's what you're trying to say, wasn't it? Yeah, thanks. So, termessos. Now, then we needed to look at the landscape and why termessos was there, why it was abandoned, who these people were, and what the landscape was like. And then it will slowly uncover the image behind us. Except there's one big problem with termessos. It's not been excavated or examined ever by archaeological excavation techniques. It's a site, from my notes, that's never been archaeologically excavated. It's a massively important site in the archaeology of the earth, right? But it's never been archaeologically excavated, right? So that's another fact. So we think we know about it. We think we know lots of little facts. Unfortunately, we might come a little bit of a cropper. So I think it's interpreting what we're seeing, which is probably more important. So we got a nice little hot hodgepodge of images, not too many, but it helps us hone in. Now, one of the continuous questions that Michael was asking this morning, he said, when are we going to see images of the homes of the people that lived at termessos? And the answer was, we're not going to see these people's homes because the ruins of their homes has long since been buried. And the only stuff that actually remains is the remains of the buildings, the public buildings and the temples and the theatres and the agora and so on, the main buildings, right? So we don't really know how the people on the lower ebb worked with everybody else. So even termessos is a massively important site, and it's probably an unusual one to look at today. So we're supposed to be looking at civilizations. Well, this is a civilization in its own right. Yeah, it's like a pre-Roman world and pre-Greek world, but it's got everything that Rome and Greece had before Rome and Greece had it. If you can get my gist. So we've got that. So termessos, if you think about it, it very interestingly enough, you can see from the termessos range all the way over to Cyprus, but probably not. What you can see is over towards the sea, and maybe if you blinked, and maybe sort of if the sunlight was right, you might be able to see over to Cyprus. So in other words, it was in a mountain sort of chain, and you could sort of look directly into the Mediterranean Sea, probably over towards Cyprus. It's quite some distance, and then because of the curve of the Earth's crust and so on, it's quite, maybe you could have, right? But the main thing is, we've got nothing written about that, by the way. The main thing is this city itself, wait for it, is 1,000 meters above sea level. It's 1,000 meters above sea level. So whenever you come across, Machu Picchu being 1,000 whatever meters above sea level, it's the highest city in the world and all the rest of it. Yeah, it's fair enough. But this is quite high as city goes. Right, now we've got two little bits of text that I'm going to use today, and I pick little bits out from it, stuff that we can probably get to grips with. Now, I actually thought I knew what I was doing today when I started looking at these people. But then when I got into it, I didn't know anything, because I'm an archaeologist, and from an archaeological point of view, we don't know anything. All we know is from a historical point of view and the building standing. What we've got is an archaeological expedition that actually recorded the buildings, not an archaeological excavation, which is two different things, right? So if we take the idea of termessos there, right, and then we try to sort of work out where we are. So there's Antalya. If we go back again, so if we go all the way down to the coast, there's Antalya, right? And then we've got Cyprus, so termessos. So if we go back to the plan again, and then we've got Antalya, and we've got termessos, necropolis. Now, termessos, necropolis, the word necropolis is sort of associated with burial and so on, but this site is not just it's a living tomb of these people. It's a direct embodiment of everything that these people were, frozen in a moment of time. So in other words, this is a Pompeii above ground level that's been completely deserted. And why was it completely deserted? Well, it was never ever captured by Alexander the Great when he besieged this city in the year 33 BC. Right, so if we want to chuck a couple of dates in there, the termessos people, the civilization there, the Paphilian people or the Salumi people, as some names of. There's one thing that when we look at civilizations, it's so easy to say actually we're looking at the Inca, or we're looking at Scythians, or we're looking at the ancient Egyptians. These people have got loads of different names. So if you look for them in history, they might slip through the net. Right, so when you're looking at images, when you're looking for information, it's really, really difficult to find the information that you need. So probably at the end, I'm gonna click on a file, and I'm just gonna scroll through a load of images at the end to sort of say, this is what we've been looking at, and you can say, oh wow, that's brilliant, and so on. So that's what we're going to do at the end. So to sort of help us with our way. So we're looking at Termessos again, looking out towards the sea, and I think Mike said, "What's the blue stuff today?" And I just looked at him. Anyway, so there's Termessos, and it was a bit difficult to get aerial views of this. I was looking at one site, then I was looking at a military website, and it said you don't have authorization to look at this military website. Leave this site now. So I panicked. At which point Mike left, and then I actually found the Google of the landscape, and one thing that you can clearly see is that within this sort of range here, if you think the best way of describing it, if anyone actually been to the mountains in Cyprus, the Troodos Mountains, where suddenly it's barren and then suddenly you've got loads of green trees and valleys and weird little things, right, and little monasteries everywhere. This is the type of landscape that I can describe this as. Suddenly there's green in the middle of nowhere. So if you look over towards the right, over towards the east, it looks all sort of barren and very few trees. And over in the west, there's lots of trees and stuff. And with the image behind me, you've got lots of trees as well, sort of giving you an idea what's going on. Or do we have an idea what's going on? No, we don't. So we're back to where we go, to Termessos, and if you squinted your eyes, you can actually see ruins within this area. Now, the interesting thing is, one of the things today, the hardest things today, was to actually get a ground plan of the city, which I failed. I failed to get a ground plan of the city of Termessos. Now, some people believe, wait for it, that the city of Termessos had tens and tens of thousands of people living there. I think I come across a figure of 150,000 people living there. It's in the middle of nowhere, right? So being in the middle of nowhere, if it's got one thing, it can survive forever. In fact, a parallel with Termessos is in the Chacahoya people of the other week, because Chacahoya people in South America, they were completely in the middle of nowhere, up in the uplands, 1,000+ meters above, whatever, and they were able to survive. They had a little bit of trade, and they were able to be independent. So if we want to think about Termessos and the people of Chacahoya, we could see a parallel, but the difference is in dates. The people of Termessos are a good 1,000 odd years before the people of Chacahoya in South America. So if we sort of want to go on a little bit more, what we can see, if we go to here, you can get an idea. You can actually get an aerial view of what we're looking at, right? So if you this sort of bit of a plan to sort of get an idea of the landscape. So if I can get my little drawery type things in here, let's get my little drawery annotation doodah efforts. So it drops away quite steeply here, right? And it actually rises up here, right? So what there's lots of terracing. It's a city on terraces. It's a very interesting city on terraces. It sort of encapsulates the high ground. It controls the contours of the high ground. What you can clearly see now showing on the screen is a theatre. That's the theatre. You're not just sort of squinting. And there are some more ruins. And as you sort of scour, there's more ruins there sticking out, and there's little bits of ruins. And actually, underneath these trees there's lots of archaeology, unexcavated archaeology. And Mike said, wouldn't it have been great to have actually had an aerial view when this landscape was affected by, a forest fire? And I said, yeah, it would be good, but unfortunately, that would have sort of killed lots of creatures and stuff, and we won't do that one. But anyway, so that's actually, Mike made a good point, because the point is you can usually find archaeology when the dense trees have gone and been destroyed by various different natural or human reasons. So if we sort of go there and we move again with my little mouse, you can actually now, as you hone in, sort of from there, you can actually see from the aerial views, you can see this theatre. Now this theatre, if I just spent time just looking at this theatre, that's all we would need to do, because that theatre itself is massively impressive, which we will go on to look at. And there you've got a massive gymnasium, right? You've got city walls. So what's going on is there's lower city walls, and if I'm going to try and get this right, and so we've got lower city walls, and we've got upper city walls. So if anyone's actually seen J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and we go to I can't remember. Anyway, there's a city in it that's built on different tiers, and that's basically what we're talking about. So it's a city on tiers, and the reason why it's a city on tiers is because it's on the side of a mountain, 1,000 meters up. Now, so it lacks one thing, water. And in fact, for a very, very long time, it had access to a very well-placed aqueduct that fed the city with all its water supplies for hundreds and hundreds of years. But unfortunately, the city came a cropper. Being reliant upon its aqueduct, something's going to happen. And it's not people putting dead animals in it trying to poison the aqueduct. It's something more natural that this landscape is prone to having. And again, what you can see is from, again, the air. So to actually try and get a context of what we're looking at, it's been useful to say, right, so what the image that you're looking at is the upper city wall, which we're going to have a look at. Now, the gymnasium might look as boring as buggery, right? Mind my French. But the gymnasium is massively important. It doesn't look important from above, but it's very, very important looking from down below. And again, what you can see, a cisterns, Corinthian temple, another temple down here, and the theatre. Now, the theatre looks tiny. Again, focus on the little speck of a theatre, right? Focus on the little speck of a theatre, right? And all will be revealed. And you can see all these little buildings poking out. Now, the theatre, to me, is the best unexcavated archaeological theatre left on the planet, because it's never been archaeologically excavated, and everything at the theatre has been left as it was for about 1,800 years, when the city was being abandoned. So this is a city lost in an eggshell moment, a broken eggshell moment, and somebody's just left it there, and they've not sort of touched the eggshell, and it's just allowed to disintegrate. So what we do have is lots of nice little carvings. So at this opportune moment, all is for the best in this best of possible worlds, Voltaire and Candide. In the most inopportune moments, what we're going to do, we're going to actually look at an article, and from that article we will get half of the information what we need to from today. So if we sort of go to that article, so I'm going to sort of do a new little bit of a screen share. Hang on, just let me stop sharing a moment. And if we can go with, I have no idea what Roger's doing. Is it me, or is Roger examining an artifacts on his desk? I don't know if you can see this, Andy. Can you see this?
Yes.
Doesn't that look spectacular?
Mm.
That's not only that is wow. Now, what is wow about this? We look at this image as well without all the sort of writing on it and stuff. That is just wow. Because you look at that and you think Roman engineering, Greek engineering, and the people of termessos engineering. So that there, that's where the pits would have been. That's where the choir would have been. That's where the stage would have been, directly in front of you, with this wonderful array of masonry, which you would have found the seats. Now, all of what you can see in front of you is all the rubble as it was left when the city collapsed, and basically it's in an area of great seismic activity. So suddenly one day there was massive seismic activity. The city was never built. People left. Job done. Bob's your uncle. Can't find Fanny your aunt. We're going to leave the city. So you can see the massive stonework that they're using. Now, the flat arch, you could say, is of Greek and then Roman and Roman engineering as well. But you're looking at lots of what's being built here going all the way back to 300, 400, 500 years BC. And Homer writes about this city. So Homer's writing around 800 years BC. So if Homer's writing about this city in 800 years, obviously the city's been around for about 200 years as well. So this is like one of those great sort of cities that emerges from what's popularly called as the Greek Dark Ages. Because we don't really know what's going in the Greek Dark Ages. We don't really know what's going on from approximately about 1,000 years to about 600 years sort of BC. And Claire's just joined us as well. So it'd be nice to sort of look at this little bit of an article, so you get little bits of information on it. Termessos. Now this is what I was saying earlier on. Termessos was a fortified city founded by the Pamphylian tribes. Called the Salumi, or also called the Salims. Now, it's good of you to join us, Claire. So what I'm going to do, Claire, can you cut your mic, darling?
Yes.
Go on. You could talk to us in the break. Don't worry, Claire. It's fine. I just had a little bit of feedback then. Good of you to join us, Claire. So in other words, what we've got, trying to find these people. So you could call them the people of Termessos. You could call them the tribe, the Pamphylian tribal people, or the people of Salumi, also called the Salims people, after the peak of Salumus. And the peak of Salumus is also a peak associated with Zeus. According to the Greek philosopher and historian Strabo, Salumi derived their name from Salumus, an Anatolian god who was later identified with Zeus. So in other words, it's a local Anatolian god that is actually Zeus, but he was given a different name. So Zeus Salumus. This is really important. We've got lots of architecture which we're going to be looking at, which is fine. Little is known about the historical context and archaeological context, so I'm just sort of putting my own bit in there as well, of Termessos. But the earliest encounter with the city comes from a text called the Anibus of Alexander. But we've also got Homer writing about these people as well. But the actual main text associated with Alexander the Great writes that Alexander surrounded Termessos in 333 BC, where Alexander likened the city to an eagle's nest, failing to take the city. My God, Isn't that absolutely amazing? It must be the only city in the history of the world that was never ever captured by Alexander the Great. Because I don't know a single city that was never captured by Alexander the Great. So what we've got a city that's not only amazing, but a city that resisted the wrath of Alexander the Great. So what we do, we zoom in on these images in a short while, and it's the Lycian people. So the Lycian people are basically the people who are in the south-western corner of Turkey, the Lycian cities. We've mentioned the Lycians before, right? So an inscription found in the Lycian city of Araxa gives the next mention of Termessos, citing a war with a league of Lycian cities, and again in conflict with its Pisidian neighbour Isdina, which identified itself with Termessos. And look at that wall. I'm looking at that and thinking, that's just too good to be true. It really, really is. Do you know what? Sometimes as an archaeologist, you're thinking that you know it all, right? I think it's rather interesting that Roger mentioned Llynfawr just before we started this today. And Llynfawr is up in the Regos, in the Rhondda Valley, right? And I go out in the Rhondda Valley with my Rhondda class, and everyone in the Rhondda class is called Morian. And that Morian was a writer at the beginning of the 1900s who used to write about the valleys. Anyway, long story short, they take me to places, and I see archaeology that I've never seen the like of before. And I'm looking at it thinking, they're looking at me and saying, well, we brought you up here to tell us what it is. And I'm saying, well, I can give it a bit of a date. And then they say, well, no other archaeologist can give us a date either, because no other archaeologist actually comes up here. And actually the same problem that we have is actually with this city. Even though archaeologists have been up there, they've never actually excavated. We don't really know about that wall, which is actually a city wall, which is the upper city wall. That's what that is. Now you've got the lower city wall and you've got the upper city wall, and it's quite amazing that you've got a wall like that, so well built, so amazingly well built. And we will actually look at this again, and I would like to just poke around a little bit. See those little arches there? That's a little arch, and there's probably more on this side. So that allows winter water to drain through. And you're thinking, well, this, these people really well thought things out, And you've got the mountain range behind it. They use the mountain range for burial. Now, the big mistake again, I made the mistake this morning of thinking that Termessos and the Paphilian people were the people of Termessos, right? Because the people at Termessos did similar things, but the people at Termessos, their city was captured by Alexander the Great. And also, Termessos isn't as grand as this site, Termessos. So if anyone's ever and when you do little bits of research on this site, probably what I'm showing you is more or less half of all there is, because it was very actually difficult to find much on this at all. So the date there, and why now the Romans knew about Termessos. They knew about it. And the Termessos created a bit of a curveball. They actually allied with Rome. So at the time that we're talking, a couple of years after the Spartan revolt, when Rome was a little bit weak in Italy, Rome was on the rise. And eventually you see the rise of Crassus, and you see the rise of Alexander the Great. Julius Caesar, two different people, may I add. And you see Mark Antony and all the rest of it. Sort of a few years later, this is where everything's happening. So gradually, the world of Rome is rising. When I use the word empire, I actually should use the word republic. But the Romans were empire building without an empire, basically. So the people of Termessos allied with Rome. They basically said, Rome's a little bit weak. We know what happens to people who resist Rome. Let's just toss our lot in with the Romans. And it saved the city. But nobody ever captured the city. It was lost due to natural causes, which we're going to mention. Now, these people retained their independent status. Basically, it was a city-state. So they had farming, they had little villages and other towns associated with this great city, and that's how it was. Ensuring the freedoms of its citizens to have autonomy, documented in the minting of coins which bear the title. Let's use the word name autonomous. So you can imagine, we're friggin' autonomous. We're the only people in the Roman world that are actually truly autonomous, because we actually sided with Rome when they needed us. They didn't conquer us. Nobody's ever conquered us. Nobody can ever conquer us. And it was true. If you're not going to be conquered by Alexander the Great, the Romans don't stand any chance. Rome's influence is apparent within the city's monuments that show elements of Greek and Roman architectural features, and with the construction of a triumphal arch in dedication to the Emperor Hadrian. So what I want to do now is actually scroll down that screen. We come out of these images and we look at them without the text. But I tell you what, so we've seen the front, the pits of this wonderful theatre, and you're just seeing a theatre as I said this morning. It looked like a theatre that had just been abandoned last week, but it could be a theatre abandoned a few years ago as far as we're concerned, but it's a theatre abandoned probably around 1,800 years ago, and it hasn't been touched since. So if human civilization collapsed tomorrow, Mother Nature would take lots of our cities back, but there would be still places that were still slightly abandoned without too many trees growing. Now look at that there. I find it difficult to actually believe that figure. At its peak, Termessos had an estimated population of 1,000. 1,000, that would be good. Has a population of 150,000 inhabitants. The population of Rome, at the peak of Termessos, maybe, I don't know, just before the birth of Jesus Christ. The population of Rome was quite sizable, probably about 2 or 3 times the size of this. The population of Rome, by around 300 years AD, gets to about 1 million people. But the 150,000 inhabitants, if you compare that with something like Pompeii probably had a population of no more than about 30,000, and you think of the size of Pompeii, and then you times the population of Pompeii by 5, and then you realize that this is a truly mega city. But I don't really know how you can get the figure of 150,000 when the site hasn't been excavated. But we do know that there was a royal palace, a gymnasium, an Odeon. Don't get cocky with me, folks. An Odeon, basically an Odeon for theatrical plays, not a cinema. 6 temples of varying sizes. 6 temples, that's nice. An agora, a marketplace, a big marketplace. A word that I hadn't come across until this one. A boulotarian, a council house, basically, a courthouse or a parliament or whatever. And a theatre with a seat. The theatre that's there has got a seating capacity of between 4,000 and 5,000 people. Now, that's impressive. A theatre that could house 4,000 to 5,000 people. That's the equivalent of the full strength of a Roman legion. 5,000. To the southwest and the north of the city, mostly within the city walls, there are large cemeteries containing rock-cut tombs. Termessos, after a gradual decline, was abandoned by around about 400 years AD, when an earthquake destroyed the primary aqueduct, cutting off vital water to the inhabitants. So I've been sort of saying about 200, it probably went into decline around 200, and by about 400, nobody lived there. it was completely abandoned, all to do with the fact that the aqueduct is broken, and without the aqueduct the city couldn't function. I'm a bit worried with that, having one aqueduct offering the full requirement of water to the city. But there's a bit of a catch there. The city itself did have access to very, very large cisterns as well. So what I'd like to do, I'm going to cut that. To give you an idea where we are again, Anatolia, and there's the little star. So I'm going to screen share again. 1 second. I need to share again. I need to go off, and I need to go back in. Now this makes a little bit more sense, doesn't it? It makes a lot more sense. This is actually on a sarcophagus. They were a bit like the Nabateans, right? And where the Nabateans had their loved ones in sarcophagi and rock cut tombs all the way around the dominating city, and the living lived sort of in the plain with drainage and the water and so on. In a way, this is very sort of similar. The Nabateans being massively independent when we look at the likes of Jordan, and we look at these people being massively independent in regards to southwestern modern day Turkey. Doesn't that look something else? Now, we don't have the view that I wanted, but you can see beyond. Basically, if you stood up there, you could see beyond more or less the mountain range, all the way over to modern day Anatolia. And this is actually that wonderful theatre that they say could have housed 4,000 to 5,000 people. Do you know what? I was looking at this, right? Let's just take another more clearer image. I was looking at this, and you know what? I thought, well, it actually looks pretty good as it is. Do you know what I mean? And I just think, well, I just think this is one of those sites that you should just leave be. We've managed with this site being like this for 1,800 or 1,600 years. We've and I just think that that's probably the way it should be, unless you go in there and every stone that you find you re-erect in exactly its original position. And then you could do a complete reconstruction of the city as you're going along. That's the only way I'd get around it. But it does look massively spectacular. And what I'm in our notes earlier on, it used the words, the city is massively influenced by Roman and Greek building styles. And I'm thinking, well, actually that doesn't look Roman, what you're looking at in front of you. And the stonework doesn't look Roman, particularly that sort of tower aspect on the right hand side, which would have been the full height of the southern projection of this wonderful theatre. That's how tall it would have been. So, and again, you've got a nice little arch there. So if we start to look around and we start to think of the arches, and we start to think about the fact that the aqueduct itself would have been very similar looking to this, but these arches still stand after all that time. So what I'm going to do, I need some meds. So I'm gonna ask if there's any questions. And we'll go from there. So we've got a wonderful turnout tonight. How many have we got? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We've got 10 of us. So what I'm going to do is Jeannie Beanie. We love you, Jeannie. You know, I got to be honest with you. Andy, she doesn't talk much about Idris. Do you think it's over?
I haven't dared ask. It's gone very dark.
I think she's had a falling out. Just between Adrena and me, right? Idris, you know, Idris. I called it Idris. He's not there. See, I nearly caught her out then, because if I had a reply, Idris would have responded. You see? See that then? So Idris isn't there anymore. Drina, you know your full sort of life-size real Idris. Where'd you get them from? I don't want an Idris myself. I'd like something like Johnny Depp or somebody else. But
All right, okay. I don't know. I can find out. My son bought it for me.
yeah, if you could find out, what we could have is when we get a class and there's like 3 people turn up in the background, I can have like an audience.
I've seen them in Morrison's.
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen lots of things in Morrison's. Talking about seeing things in Morrison's, Margaret. Oh, by the way, Margaret and Anne, when you do get your tops next week, you've got to stick them on.
Yeah.
Yeah, can do, yeah.
Okay.
Right, Anne, you haven't got anything to say? All right, then. What about you, Pete the Meat?
No, it's all fine. All good.
Andy Pandy, pudding and pie. Sorry, Andy, I'm just really childish.
Not heard that one before. That building behind you is very different from the other stuff. The theatre looks very like the Lycean ones I was looking at just round the corner where the other town is. And they're built. They're about the same period as well. But that one, that sort of square dressed design on the stone, not seen anything like that before.
That's where I was getting on with the right hand, the right side of the theatre in the front. That's not Roman. It's very different.
Yeah, very different.
And we got very excited about this image, so we do actually come to a full image of this. So we will be doing that.
Good. Yeah, the archways and the seats in the theatre look very similar, but then the Greek and Roman ones are very similar as well. So
yeah, exactly.
Somebody obviously had the rights on the seats. So
yeah, I think they did. What about you, Dave?
It looked very Greek.
Okay.
The whole thing looked very Greek.
Okay, thanks, Dave. But that doesn't behind me.
No, not seen anything like that.
And Annie.
Yeah.
Anything, love?
No. I came in late. I'm pretty late. I missed half an hour.
Yeah, well, don't worry about it. You can watch the dodgy recording on it. Anyway, it was a lot of banter with Roger telling us about his love life and stuff. None of us were interested. We all fell asleep. Anything you want to say, Rog? I've asked you to unmute. No, nothing. What about you, Clary?
Nothing, thank you.
There was one thing, Carl.
Go for it.
That the ruins there reminded me of some of the old buildings in Santorini. With
Yes.
the blocks and all the rest of it, with the floors.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. So
that type of thing. The main, that tall part, no, not so much, but the main walling. I thought, well, I've been to the ruins at Santorini, and similar sort of blocks and things in the walls and all the doors and all this. You mentioned something of the Greek influence, the same thing, Eastern Mediterranean. It looked like it.
Basically, what we got is a lot of false windows as well. So you know, so what we'll do? Oh, Davey, right? I tell you what, I'll have a private talk with Davey whilst we have a break. All right. So
I'm going at 9 o'clock.
All right, then we'll have a very, very short break for you, lovely. Okay.
Well, thank you, Carl.
Thanks, Roger. You make me feel so good. Right, anyway, we're gonna pause that now. So I don't think Jessica had anything to say, because if she had anything to say, she'd interrupt. So there you go.
Carl.
I haven't got anything to say. You've done well, Carl.
Oh, I'm glad I've done well. Yeah, that's good. I've got better approval rating than Joe Biden, because he's not very good a president, is he? Anyway, so bring back Donald Trump. Anyway, I didn't say that, did I? Anyway, what we'll do, we'll take a break, and we'll go from there. So we're back after the break, and I feel with the subject that we're doing today is that there's so many stones to look at, there's so many arches to understand, there's so many styles to look at. We're only just scratching the surface, really. It's like learning about the Titanic for the first time, and then learning about one or two of the people on it, and then maybe understanding that it was fine dining and all the rest of it, and then you can't go any further. You know what the Titanic looks like? It had 3 funnels on it, or did it have 4? You know, that type of thing. So I think this site is very similar to that, and because we can only scratch the surface and we haven't scratched below the surface, I think historians and archaeologists are under we've got a massive disadvantage. But Andy, I need Andy with me on this one, because this is an unbelievable set of architecture, and it's not Roman, it's not Greek, and it's something very, very different. And it's below the lower course. You can actually see that there's no pillars or columns represented. And actually, one really interesting thing. Look at that doorway on the right. It goes off at an angle. It actually goes off at an angle. It's not a normal frame like this one, right? Like that one. It actually clearly goes off at an angle, which you can clearly see. It's not a distortion it's not a distortion there. And what the other thing as well is, then what you do have is, if you look at that there, it's perfectly arranged, and look how linear these columns are. Absolutely perfect. And as we sort of go down there as well. So it's everything is to perfection here. It's absolute massive perfection. And but back to this, I'm sure that doorways are an angle, or I've got that wrong. Andy, what do you think?
I think it might be an optical effect that's created slightly by the lens and by shadow, because I think it is actually a square one.
Right. Okay. Then, Andy, do you know what? I'm prepared to say that I've made a mistake. Yeah, I'll go with that. That I've made a mistake.
It's difficult. It is difficult to tell, though. So.
Yeah. No, actually, I'm going to bow towards the fact that I've just made a mistake on that one. That's fine. But it does look like it's at an angle, doesn't it? That sort of effect. It does. Anyway, back to the sense of this. The blocks themselves, the way they're cut, it's. They're ashlar. They're dressed in a panel. All of these are dressed in a panel. They're all sort of little panels, and they're little sort of brick-like when you got the frogs on side on. But this is all stone. Every single one of these stones is perfectly dressed. The interesting thing is, if you actually look further down below as well. If you look further on down below, you can see that the masonry is very different down below than the masonry above. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, this, even though you've got the flat arch that would be representative of Greek culture, yeah, it's still looking very different from anything Greek and anything Roman, and it's nothing to what I've seen before. But there is a similarity between one civilization. I'm thinking about the Central and South American civilizations, where they have this really fine ashlar work. Everything fits in, because if you actually look at the stonework, these blocks are actually not regular. They're actually irregular sizes. They're really irregular, and that's something. And all this stuff is really irregular as well. It's regularity and uniformity, but taking something else out of another book. And got very excited by this, but there's more images that we got excited about. And again, when I don't have all the information, you're bound to make the sort of mistakes about the doorway that I've made. But if we sort of move on a little bit further, and we sort of move that on again, and look at this. This is actually the site of the gymnasium. You know, that aerial view, and I said we're going to look down at that, and we're going to look at that gymnasium, and it doesn't look like anything. That's the gymnasium. And you've actually got lots of false windows and false doors. And you've got that arch curving, and it's got that block work in there. Again, everything's well dressed, but the beds in the block work are not uniform, and there's probably a reason for that. And I might actually know the answer. I was looking at some research years ago, and there was this guy who was looking at seismic activity and blocks and building. If you're going to build a structure that all the stone is actually uniform, right? In an earthquake situation, the building's going to collapse. But if the stonework is all sort of fits in and has got some movement to give and move around and all the rest of it, in an earthquake region, that's probably going to be the approved way of building. This is exactly what we're seeing here. And what you're seeing again is something, another illusion, that you've actually got a mountain range behind it, but this overlooks a valley. This is 1,000 meters up. So when I look at my notes, and I'll have an image of this wonderful world as a backdrop, the city of Termessos and its reliant subject world, you see very different things than anywhere else. And it's also when we realized, I remember saying to Mike this morning, I've just got to make sure I don't make the same mistakes as I made this morning, but I am making mistakes this evening, which is fine. I'm examining this like you guys. So when we looked at the site of Termessos, which is the other site by one of the Lycidian cities on the west on the western side of the peninsula. The reason why we knew we had two different cities is that one spoke about still being occupied and into a much greater time, more recent time than this one, was the fact that the archaeology at Termessos isn't as well preserved as the archaeology at Termessos, the archaeology that we're looking at now. And do you know what? I would just, it's very poetic looking at something like this. It's very Clash of the Titany, you know, it is very interesting. Now, we're not actually at Termessos, we're actually at Termessos. So the reason why I've kept this image in of Termessos and not Termessos, this is Termessos and this is Termessos, is if you do a comparison, look at the differences in building between the two cities, which sound very similar. And then we started to realize that this is actually superior craftsmanship. That this is actually in the rock face.
Is that not Lycian?
No, it's again. You're talking about the Lycian influence when you look over towards the islands as well, and I know exactly what you're talking about with the ability to actually carve into the rock, and to make the rock speak from the craftsmanship. But whether this is influenced by the Lycians or not, what we do have to say is that this is from our city of Termessos. Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm thinking that what we've got is a people that seem to be very much standalone in their isolation, and whatever architectural influences that they've got and given out and received is still done in isolation, because these people are never conquered. They're never sort of they're at war. Andy, if we can remember saying at the beginning, they were at war with the Lycidians. They were at war with them. So, but then again, it doesn't mean to say that the people didn't do similar things. So we were again looking at this, and we sort of, hang on a minute. Oh, hang on. We've missed an image. I think what we did, I think we zoomed in. Hang on a minute. Zoom in on a bit more, and I'll zoom in on a minute. I think what we did, we didn't do another image. We actually zoomed in something like this. And one of the things that we were talking about this morning was that we were talking about, you know, is this is this actually being constructed within the rock? But no, this is actually carved out of the rock. So this is all carved out of the rock. So it's a false facade. It is, so what you need to do, you need to go in from above, and that's how you get an entrance. So if we want to talk about comparisons like Lycidians, and we want to look at other comparisons with other cultures like the Etruscans, which are quite some distance away, then we start to see that the architecture of the Mediterranean has different facets that seem to integrate, which seem to be appropriate. And if you notice quickly, you can actually see there's a head there. That's actually a carved head, 2 carved heads. So almost as if it's on some kind of scroll work.
Okay, Carl.
Okay, Roger, baby!
I'm getting the bus now, so I've got to go.
Right, Roger, be careful on that bus, okay? We wouldn't want you getting hurt, okay?
Okay, thank you, Carl.
Thank
See
you,
you tomorrow.
son.
See
Thank you,
tomorrow.
baby. I'll see you tomorrow, babe.
Yeah, see you. Bye, all.
Bye, Rog.
Enjoy.
Bye.
See you, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care, filthy Rog. I'll see you then. I don't know how he puts up with me, All these insults I give you every single week. Most abnormal people wouldn't get away with it. So, again, what is this? We chucked this in there earlier on. And we just thought that this carving is wonderful. But this is actually a carving associated with a sarcophagus. Now, we've already mentioned in the opening material that the sarcophagi were very close with the people. They were very, the burials were actually within the city, which is something that the Romans would not do. Unless you were a really famous person, you didn't have burials within a Roman city. Burials in association with the Roman city were always outside the city, where these people, our wonderful people of termessos, actually had their burials within the city bounds, which is, and this is actually quite, it's actually really ornate. But you could actually look at this and shame I haven't got this a little bit more clearer. You can see sort of heads, and you can see these wonderful columns which has canthus leaves on them as well, which would be Corinthian style, which is in the Roman style. And then what you've got more of a Greco link with the lid, and you've also got the wonderful lions looking out. So this is a sarcophagus. So it just makes you wonder, just briefly, just lightly, to what depth is their civilization. And what you can see at the bottom is you've got this looks very Roman to me, because you've got more or less a gladiatorial competition between a lion and a lioness and a gentleman here. But then again, we don't know much about these people. I think one of the things I've done, and we've mentioned about the Lycidian cities and so on, and we talked about the Greeks, and I think I mentioned the Scythians and so on. I think the one thing that we're learning about these people is that we're looking at other civilizations and trying to understand who they are. We're not actually trying to understand who these people are. So if we start to look at what we've got behind me, maybe that might give us a clue to how these people worked, because all we've got is the odd writing. You've got Homer, we've got Strabo, we've got the writings associated with Alexander the Great, and we've got other writings about this city, and we've got the early Christian church writing about the city as well. It had its own bishop, but then again, there was hardly anyone living here at that time. So we sort of move on a little bit. Oh, hang on, don't know why that's there.
Carl,
Yeah, go on.
there was some writing on the top of that tomb as well.
Yeah.
Looks like on that frieze there, looks like it might be writing.
What, along here?
Yeah, it might be decorative, but it looks different.
It looks actually completely irregular, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I actually thought that was like, oh yeah, it is writing. That's a H.
Yeah.
Hang on a minute.
It could be, but there's also a repeating circle there as well, so it might just be
Yeah.
a decorative pattern. It's difficult to tell. It's
No.
nothing like the Lycian stuff, though. Sorry to go back to the to them. They built their tombs were all like little houses that they lived in, either big ones or little ones, but nothing elaborate like that at all. And they were always outside their cities.
Like the Romans.
Yeah,
But
the
these are
Romans
not
are like
yeah.
most other civilizations around there, so that makes them significantly different.
But there is one similarity. It makes them very similar to the Nabateans.
Yep.
It
It's
makes,
interesting.
Yeah, it
Really
makes them
interesting.
very similar to the Nabateans. And in a way, if we go back one single point, actually, this looks good as it is. We're not going to zoom in on it. The one thing about this, we've got the idea of the cisterns. We know that they've got cisterns.
Yeah.
Now, we haven't really excavated under the ground, and they must have had lots more cisterns. If that's the case, it's back to what I said about the Nabateans. When we look at the Nabateans are actually sort of they're contemporary in a way. They are contemporary, not in a way. They're sort of contemporary in a way, but there's a bit of a distance between them. The Nabateans are also inland as well. These people are inland, but massive similarity is the sense of burial. With the Nabatean, the burials were to be portrayed within the city as a backdrop, and the water was stored underneath the burials, and we all thought that was really unusual. But the Romans wouldn't have done anything of the sort, and I think those are the clear differences. And I think the other thing as well is the other confusing thing is we've got the flat arch, and we've got the arch itself. So there's two clashes of style. Obviously, the one down below and the one above. And actually, the one on the left doesn't look like it was completed either. Can you remember when we looked at the Nabateans, we mentioned about that there's a tomb there. It doesn't look like it's been completed. It looks like they've abandoned it. Similar to what we've got here. But the big difference between what we see with the Nabateans is that what we got is a representation a lot more of the human form. Like you've got two heads there. So if you actually go again, you've got the forms of these angels, and you've got these are actually look really anatomically perfect. They really do. Without going into too much detail, they look really anatomically perfect. So if we then if we move on again back, you know what we were saying about if we look at that building behind me, you can see that the stonework is not regular. That's why it makes it very different from Roman stonework and very different from Greek stonework, and the dressing is very different. So if you squint your eyes, where are you, Andy? He's not saying anything. If I squint my eyes, we could.
Don't know. Where do you think?
Cusco.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's funny. I was just looking quickly at some pictures of the early Lycian stuff, and that's very like the Inca stuff, where you get irregular stones all fitting together perfectly, and they've got that kind of rounded dressing, so the edges are cut in slightly, so they stick out in profile a bit like that.
Well, the Inca stones much bigger.
Yeah. Yes, that's a good point. Good point.
Hang on a minute. Hang on. If you remember the lecture about the Chaco Hoya people, right? Yeah. When we did a comparison towards the end, I reminded you all that if you look at Cusco, you've got these massive stones, but if you look at Machu Picchu, you've got massive stones, and there's another phase of building with blocks similar to this, and then they get very random. So the period when Machu Picchu is actually within the Inca world is when that they're using dressed work like this, and then actually towards the later period of Machu Picchu, towards about the 1520s and 1530s, it gets really irregular and crude, unlike this. So this is, if you want to do any comparisons, the comparison I would make is with that sort of phase, the 1470s of the Inca world, because if you look at this, I would love to actually be able to look directly at this, because there's so much of this that is absolute. This wall itself is absolutely fascinating, and this is actually a wall. This is actually a defensive wall.
It looks like a retaining wall.
Yes, but it's described as a defense. I was going to come on to that, right? It's a defensive wall within the inner part of the city, right? It's the inner city wall. But you are right. What you can put behind that is a lot. You can have cisterns. You can have all sorts of different things. In other words, if you want to scrub the idea of a defensive wall and use the idea of the ha-ha, where you've got everything going on and you can just see over and that sort of vista, within the idea of the ha-ha in the Georgian sense is that you create a wall and it's sort of, you can't sort of see in, but you can see out, that type of thing, and it's sort of, and you got everything into it. That's sort of the comparison I'm trying to make.
I wonder if the theatre was built at the same time or if that was later.
When you look at the theatre architect, in a way, this architecture is different from the architecture behind me.
Yeah.
But it's a similar type of style, and then go on, Andy.
I was just going to say the picture behind you. You need to look at the base layer, not the decorative top there, because that's very different. But the base layer is quite well similar in that it's got the larger stones irregular laid out, but not dressed the same way as those ones.
So you've got clearly different phases of influence, and there is one thing that I would say, maybe. What is of significance with these people? This is a fleeting comment. What is of significance is that their culture is the hallmark of their culture is the active ability to take on so many different influences and say it's theirs, rather than sticking with one influence. So what I'm talking about, if you're in ancient Rome, you build in that ancient Roman style for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Nothing much changes. In the ancient Greek way, nothing much changes. But these people seem to adapt and change every 100 or so years in their style, which is quite clear. I think that's a clear point. And again, what we do see is that in relief flower that is being created. They love their stonework, and the thing is, with their stonework, it's not that posh marble that we're seeing everywhere. It's the solid rocky stuff. It's the solid firm stuff, and somebody's name who will not be mentioned. She doesn't want to name mentioned. Claire says a marriage of various influences throughout time. I'm going to take that as my own. So this is a marriage of various influences throughout time. Agree. I'm glad you agree with me. That was a really good suggestion. Shame you didn't have it, Claire. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to keep that there, and I'd like to read out a few more bits and pieces. Right, so that's what I'm going to do now. So you've got that little flower in the background, and I've got this really nice piece, and it answers a few little choice questions that we had. So, here we go. A visit to the ruins of the ancient city of Termessos is an unforgettable experience, I should say. Completely different from visiting ancient cities located along the Mediterranean coast or anywhere else. First of all, to get to Termessos, you need to travel to the altitude of 1,000 meters. Deep into the Taurus mountain range. The difficulties of this journey are quickly compensated by the vista seen from the ancient theatre, which is considered to be most ideally situated of all the ancient buildings of its kind in Turkey. It just basically, you see the sea. Secondly, this eagle's nest as described by Alexander the Great, lies in the national park, where the remains of ancient buildings are nestled today, and they would have been in the past, amongst pine forests, and a number of rare plant species grow undisturbed by mass tourism, because mass tourism doesn't get there. It's only small numbers of people who actually get here, which is really important. Termessos is shrouded in legends and has been the object of fascination and studies conducted by many travellers and scholars, most notably of a KARL-JAMES, a Polish researcher of the Parfilian people. But he didn't excavate. As I said, he surveyed there. He made records, but he didn't excavate. Now, interesting enough, the uniqueness of this place has not gone unnoticed by international organisations. And the ruins of Termessos are among the candidates for the UNESCO World Heritage List, but are amongst the candidates. Now, the notes that I'm actually looking at in front of me, I've got a wonderful image that I actually want to share with you now. Right? It's actually quite a spectacular image. So I'm just going to show this. You're going to see this now. So let's do a little bit of a screen share. I want to share this with you guys. Isn't that quite a spectacular view?
Fantastic.
Now, if you went the other side, you'd be able to more or less look all the way out to the coast. You could see sort of a vista all the way to the coast. And this stands out. Could this be seen from the valley? Is this like Machu Picchu? It's likely. I'm gonna say it's not visible from the likes of the valley, but this itself could see for miles around. And again, just think, 5,000 to 6,000 people sat within this beautiful theatre. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try and set this into, let's sort of get that there so it can sort of get you thinking again. So going back to my notes again. So I mentioned in my other notes, this is why you've always got to look at different notes, right? It's sort my first notes that I read out, right? I added a bit of Homer in there because I knew it from this text, right? The first mention was not at the time of Alexander the Great. The first mention was in the pages of the Iliad, written by Homer. Homer mentions that Bellerophon, the Greek hero who rode a winged horse Pegasus and became known as Chimera Killer, was commissioned by the king of Lycia to conquer Termessos. He managed to force the residents of Termessos to surrender by flying over the mountains on Pegasus and throwing stones at the rebels. Now, that's a fantasy story. And then again, it could have some fact. It could sort of explain why the people are there. It could be like that sort of Romulus and Remus story. It could be fact, it could be fiction. But the fact of the matter is, we know of a city existing here in the writing of Homer. Now, albeit that maybe that's not a fantasy story at all, maybe it's based on some fact, but Homer's writing about a people here and their city. And the Lycian people wanted to conquer them, right? And Homer's writing about this around 800 years BC. So it makes this city at least 3,000 years old from today's date. There must have been something quite substantial here for Homer to actually write about it. Apart from this story, then we know very little, and then we go into the writings associated with Alexander the Great. And it's talking about people settling here, various different people associated with Anatolian god. Salmaeus, who's identified with Zeus, the god of the mountains and thunder, the god of all gods. And then Termessos, Alexander the Great doesn't capture the city. It's the eagle's nest. We've mentioned the word eagle's nest a few times. He doesn't manage to capture the city. And you could think that this is more difficult than the Gordian knot. Look it up. The knot that could not be unravelled. The Macedonian king lost in Termessos a lot of time, but deep gorges and steep mountain slopes provided sufficient defences for Termessos inhabitants. So Alexander the Great just left the city alone. He just, out of all the cities that Alexander the Great left, it was this one. He left it. All the victories. Alexander the Great defeated every single army in its path. Every single city that was besieged by Alexander the Great's men was captured, but this one wasn't. So this is why it slipped. And the other thing as well is, if Alexander the Great had captured this city, it probably would have ended there and then, and we wouldn't have this talk today, and I wouldn't be able to tell you anything about it. It would have been lost in time, and the only thing that we'd have about this city is Alexander the Great flattened it, and everything that you're seeing now wouldn't even exist anymore. So thankfully he didn't capture the city. So there's lots of other depictions of the city, and then we sort of go into around. There's talk that it may have been captured at some time and so on, but then we go to around 100 years BC, so 200 years or so after Alexander the Great's time. And Termessos took part in a number of conflicts, first against the League of Lycian cities, and then against their neighbours from the city of Izinda. In this period, so 100 years BC, the city also established their colony under the name of Termessos Minor. During another conflict, this time with people associated with the king of Pergamon, Attalus, and then basically there was some kind of friendship and things were okay. So Termessos then prospered, and we do believe that it had a deal with the Romans in 71 BC and so on. The end to the prosperity and existence of Termessos came with an earthquake that destroyed the aqueduct supplying drinking water to the city. The exact year of this event has not been determined, although it is known that even in the period of early Christianity, Termessos was the seat of the bishop. But this was around 400 years AD. 400 years AD, this bishop had a city that was already deserted, and from that time until its discovery by modern travellers, it fell into oblivion. So for between 1,600 and 1,800 years, the city has been left to decay and has been more or less forgotten about. So the last little fact we need to chuck in here is the archaeology, and then the archaeology stops. And then actually that would be a good place to stop myself. So archaeological research. In the first half of the 1800s, the first European explorers arrived to Termessos. Among them were Thomas, Abel Spratt, and Edward Forbes. That name Edward Forbes should ring a bell, who described their findings in southern Asia Minor in the Book of Travels in Lycia, published in 1847. Charles Fellows, the British archaeologist, also visited Termessos, and the results of these first travels to the ruins of Termessos were described of the preserved buildings and first plans of the ancient city. In the 1880s, Termessos was repeatedly visited by the Polish researcher KARL-JAMES, whose detailed descriptions and careful drafted plan of the city, which actually I couldn't find it anywhere, along with the sketches prepared by a George Nyman, were published in the second volume of the Cities of Pamphylia and Pisidia. We mentioned the Pisidians earlier on, associated with the Philian and Termessos. The Polish researcher then use the following words to describe termessos. So we're going to read them out. We've nearly finished. Of all the cities of Pisidia which we have visited, Termessos has the most peculiar and the greatest position. It is at the same time a watchtower commanding a distant view, a nest buried deeply in a valley, surrounded by a ring of mountains. If its inhabitants indulged in brigandage, they could not find a better place than in this eagle's nest. And in a moment, everything that we know about the city's just been put together. Everything. That's all we know. Everything's been put together. And the reason why that is, unfortunately, since the end of the 1800s, not much has been learned about Termessos, because only the surface ruins, the surface of the ruins have been conducted so far. It is amazing that such an interesting and mysterious city has not encouraged archaeologists to conduct systematic research. In other words, no archaeological excavation has ever taken place at the city. People ask me this. They say, oh, has that site ever been archaeologically excavated? And I say, oh yeah, it's been excavated by a guy or a woman years ago. Oh, did they do this? Yeah. What do you know about it? Yeah, we got that from archaeology. What do you know about Termessos? Nothing. It's never been archaeologically excavated. So what you see is what I've offered you, and that's all we've got. So this city will remain a mystery, and it's open for us all to do a little bit more research. So what I'd like to do is ask, are there any questions from anyone? David, because David wants to go to bed.
Very good.
Thank you, Dave. I'm glad you thought it was very good. You should hear what he said about my lecture last week. Christ. Peter.
No, once again, we look at the geology of the area and the availability of the rock for those buildings, and it all comes back to the area and what's available there at the time. I would suggest that all those stones have been dressed for the building, but there has to be adequate stones of that nature there ready to be dressed.
That's true. That's true. David, I appreciate your kind thoughts as well. I hope I can get something like that out of Drina now. Drina.
It was wonderful. Thank you very much.
You see what I did there? I built up a little bit of a competition. Now, see if Margaret can do any better. So good. So anything else, Drina? No?
No, thank you.
Right. What about you, Margaret?
I just wonder how accessible it was to get to and from the coast, and if they traded along the sea from there, if there was an ancient port.
In some burbled notes, it basically mentioned about there's no actual port which is nearby, but naturally, if you want to Chachapoya people. If you want, the Chachapoya people were up in the middle of nowhere, but they still had all those trade links. Right, so this is the point. So they were able,
They would use the Amazon, I presume.
Yeah, but yes, they would have. But then again, when you look at the Chachapoya, they're 1,000 meters. They're 1,000 meters above the landscape as well.
I just wonder how they managed to trade up there.
Yeah, there is water access naturally, but you've got to move this inland to get there. A bit like the Chachapoya people, but like the Chachapoya people, these people were very successful.
Right.
And I think with the Chachapoya people, it's contemporary. Not we've got 1,000 years apart or whatever, but the instrument of collapse is not really at the hands of conquest. And Claire's got to go. Have you, Claire? Claire's gone.
He's gone.
See you, Claire. Anyway, Andy.
I was just wondering with the collapse of that aqueduct that maybe the connection is the other way around, that the people from there went to the Lycian and took their architecture to them.
Ah.
It's quite possible.
They're very close. So
Yes.
you know.
Yes. And what about you, Anne? I think Anne's gone to sleep.
No, I'm just resting, lying down.
Are you pining for the fjords? I can do the lumberjack song if you want. Now I'm a lumberjack and I like that song because it suits me quite well. I wear high heels, suspenders and a bra. Right, okay. Right, okay. Jessica, what about you?
No, that was very interesting. Something to put on the map to maybe visit in the future. Never know.
Well, if you talk nice to Pete, right, he can take you there in his camper van.
I presume there's a good road to it these days.
Well, I saw the plan. There's a bit of a zigzaggy road from the north, but you can't get it from the south. You can only get it from the north, sort of east. There's a sort of road leading there, but and that's it.
I'm up to Kendal Castle, so I'm sure I could manage that.
Yeah, inland Turkey's always difficult. The roads go around the coast at the moment, but they're very, very good roads around the coast. So
yeah,
there's roads around the area as it stands at the moment.
yeah.
Well, there you go. Pete's got his little. So Pete's already planning to go.
Good plan, Pete. I'll come.
So hang on a minute. Pete's got to come up to pick up David, Drina, Margaret, and Anne and Andy from Grange.
Yeah.
Right. Go via Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Back down to Barrow-in-Furness, via Barrow-in-Furness, all the way down to Dover. Come back to Wales to pick up Claire and then get over. That'll be a good trip.
We need a helicopter to drop in. That would be the best route.
God. Talking about helicopters, if Gilbert was still with us, we could have gone there in the plane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He would have definitely taken one of us, and that's
Yeah,
it.
maybe Tommy's taken on his share.
Oh God, please. Maybe.
Yeah, you'd forget where we're going.
Exactly. So I'm seeing lovely David tomorrow, and anyone else who wants to join me in the at 1:30, and obviously I've got to speak to Jessica after this as well, and Jessica will be seeing whoever. So what I'm going to do is hopefully I'll be seeing you all next week. Are there any final questions before we call it a night?
No.
Good.
Would they have spoken?
What language?
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that they wouldn't be speaking Welsh, if that helps. And they definitely wouldn't have spoken Celtic either.
Yes.
I wouldn't be too certain about that.
No, it's a bit too far south for that, but you're right. Yeah.
I get doing pretty well with this now.
The sea people were not far away.
That's true.
Yeah, all right, that's fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough. That's a good little fact. Fair enough.
Cappadocia as well is just a few miles north of there.
Oh, we'll be doing Cappadocia in the future as well.
Oh, good.
I've
It's an
never heard
interesting
of
place.
that. Cappadocia.
Troglodytes.
Yeah, little people who live there.
I like troglodytes.
Yeah.
You kind of imagine they're like little dwarf people. I don't know why.
Hobbits. Yeah.
Don't you?
Yeah.
People from Barry.
All mining people are like that, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. Right, so if there's nobody else who want to say anything else, I'll speak to Jessica after this. So I've had a good night, so that's great. Don't forget, next week we're visiting Egypt. The fleeces are on the way. We're doing the newsletter, and you know about York. So other than that, I'm going to say good night to Dreeny Beanie, Pete the Meat, Dave the Dave, Andy Pandy, Margaret, and Jessica. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. All. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Carl. Good one.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
Another good one.
Oh, well, look, did you hear Pete say that? Oh my God, amazing. Right. So Anne's fallen asleep. See you, Anne.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.
Don't worry, Alan. I'll kick you out now. See you next week.
Yeah. Bye.
Enjoy your hoodie. Tra. Right. So we'll. Oh God, no! I don't want to submit a. Oh God. Don't report. I'll have to report her. That means you can't join. Right. Okay. I'm going to end this recording. If you haven't got anything else to say, on 3, 2, Okay, good. Okay, good. Oh, okay. Stop recording.